Guys, I'm not exaggerating. My heart still racing from the moment that we see the Batmobile start up for the first time. And now I have to try and focus and do a video on 25 things you missed in the Batman? Okay, I'm gonna give it a try, but I'm still giddy as a school child right now. It's all so awesome. Anyway, here we go with 25 things that you missed in the Batman. And yes, there are going to be heavy spoilers in this video, so this goes without saying, you have been warned. Let's go. While the Riddler might be the primary antagonist in the movie, we do see a number of other rogues in Batman's gallery make an appearance, such as the Penguin, Carmine Falcone, and even a cameo from Barry Keoghan's new iteration of the Joker. But the movie also makes subtle references to other Batman villains in the cards that the Riddler leaves for Batman. For example, the first card features an owl, which is likely a nod to the sinister, shadowy organization, the Court of Owls, which by the way were first seen in Scott Snyder's new 52 graphic novel of the same name. The Court of Owls is made up of Gotham's elite and rules the city in secret and uses its legion of assassins, known as the Talons, to take out anyone who gets in their way. This reference bears even more significance as Robert Pattinson hinted that the Court of Owls could be the villains in a sequel. As we mentioned though, the other cards also pay reference to other Batman villains, with the second card featuring a mad scientist, which could be seen as a reference to Hugo Strange. The third has a woman on it who looks a lot like Poison Ivy. The fourth has a set of eyes that looks like the Cheshire Cat, which can be taken as a reference to the Mad Hatter, while the fifth card includes a boy with a puppet, which is likely a nod to the puppet Scarface. While the Batman doesn't make many references to the broader world of DC outside of Batman and Gotham, with the likes of Metropolis never getting a shout out, there is a reference to a place that DC fans should be familiar with. At the end of the movie, as Batman and Catwoman go their separate ways, Selina says that she's going out of town for a while and possibly headed to Blüdhaven. In DC lore, Blüdhaven is a New Jersey city between Gotham and Atlantic City, and it's the place where Nightwing sets up camp after he decided to split from his partner, Batman. Now, the Batman movie takes inspiration from a number of Batman comic books, including Hush, The Long Halloween, Year One, Ego, Zero Year and Earth One, and we are going to go through the references to the comic books one by one, starting off with Hush. The story follows a mysterious figure known as the titular Hush. Now, Hush has a vendetta against Batman and the Waynes, and systematically sets out to make Bat's life a living hell, and the Riddler plays an important part in the story. The Riddler's mask and general outfit do resemble that of Hush, as well as his personal feud with the Waynes, but the most direct reference to Hush comes during the Riddler's video on Thomas Wayne and how he tried to silence a reporter who was planning on airing out dirt that he had on his wife Martha during Thomas Wayne's mayoral campaign. During this video, the word hush money can be seen on screen as the Riddler's plan begins to unravel. As we mentioned, The Long Halloween is another comic book that inspired not only this movie, but Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, with the director saying that it's one of the most cinematic graphic novels of all time. The Long Halloween follows a secretive serial killer, known only as Holiday, who murders members of Carmine Falcone's crew on particular holidays, with the first one being Halloween. The Batman also starts with a murder on Halloween, although the events of the movie only take place for a week as opposed to months like the comic book, meaning it's more like the short Halloween than anything. Also, the storyline of Thomas Wayne saving Carmine Falcone's life after being shot in the chest is something that is featured in The Long Halloween. Moving on from one comic book masterpiece to another, Frank Miller's Year One also served as an inspiration for the tone and style of the movie, with Zoe Kravitz, Selina Kyle looking very similar to the one seen in that comic book. Speaking of Selina, in Year One, Catwoman scratches the side of Carmine's face, resulting in claw scars for the remainder of the comic book arc. This is mirrored in a similar scene in The Batman, when Catwoman and Carmine get into a fight, leaving him with similar marks on his face until his eventual death. Also, this one might be a little bit contentious, but the framing of the diner where the Riddler is waiting for the police to capture him, yeah, that gives me some Nighthawks by Edward Hopper vibes. This would make sense, as it also served as inspiration for the artwork behind the diner scene in Year One, where Gordon embarks on a steamy affair with his colleague, Sergeant Sarah Essen. Another comic book to be referenced in the Batman is Earth 1, with the reveal of Martha Wayne's lineage as at Arkham. Like in the movie, in Earth 1, her last name is Arkham before marrying Thomas Wayne, and it's the first time in live action where Martha has actually been seen as a member of the founding family of Gotham. As we mentioned, ego also has an influence, with Reeves saying, quote, "I wanted to get into the mindset of the character and I wanted to think of the psychology for me. I think one of the cool deep dive ones was Darwin Cook's ego. He's confronting the beast that is Batman, and there's a kind of duality." End quote. Now, while the big Nolan-style climax of the Riddler planning to flood Gotham didn't quite feel tonally in keeping with the noir-style crime thriller that the first 2.5 hours had been dedicated to, fans of the comic book Zero Year would have understood why it happened. In that storyline, the Riddler also manages to flood Gotham, but it goes one step further, with him essentially turning the city into an apocalyptic wasteland, with the Riddler then taking control of what was Gotham. As of right now, we don't know whether or not Gotham will stay underwater, but despite the Riddler being behind bars, the ending of the movie feels very similar to this character arc. Moving away from the comic book references now and onto the nods to the brilliant but campy 1960s series starring Adam West, which Matt Reeves admitted he had a soft spot for. In Bruce Wayne's apartment, we see many gothic furnishings, but one of the most notable is the bust of the famous playwright William Shakespeare. Of course, this is a reference to the 1960 series, with Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson flipping up the head of a Shakespeare bust and toggling a hidden switch that activated a secret door behind a bookcase that would of course lead them down to the Batcave. Another reference to Adam West in the Batman series is in the shape of the nose on Batman's mask. While a majority of recent iterations of Batman have opted to go with a more pointed nose, Robert Pattinson's looks more rounded and snout-like, which is similar to the one sported by Adam West in the series, although the eyebrows are nowhere to be seen. Also, random question, did anyone else think that the criminal who robbed the convenience store at the beginning of the movie was reminiscent of a Nightmare Before Christmas character? I mean, this would make sense, as that movie was directed by Tim Burton, who also directed the 1989 Batman movie and Batman Returns, so perhaps it was a subtle nod. One of the key locations to show up in the movie is the Iceberg Lounge, the nightclub where the Penguin spends most of his time holed up, and the club acts as a location for the city's main crime bosses to meet up and get up to nefarious deeds. This is something taken straight out of the comics, with the Iceberg Lounge also having the exact same purpose, and it was also seen in the video game Arkham City, and it is known as the home base of the Penguin, so expect to see more of it in the Penguin spin-off series. Another famous Gotham locale referenced in the movie is Blackgate Penitentiary, where Penguin wishes Falcone a good night in the prison. Blackgate in the comics is usually exclusively for the most dangerous criminals, and it's traditionally located on a small island in the Gotham Bay, and it's also the maximum security prison that Bane helped the convicts escape from in The Dark Knight Rises. So we all caught the cameo from the Joker. I mean, the laugh gave it away, but did everyone catch the cameo from Batman's trusty sidekick Robin? Well, kind of. At the beginning of the movie, as Batman beats the living crap out of a gang of thugs wearing skeleton paint on their faces, one of the members is hesitant about getting involved. That member is played by none other than Jay Lycurgo, who DC fans might recognize as Tim Drake in the Titans TV series. Of course, Tim Drake ends up becoming the third iteration of Robin in the comics, and it could potentially pave the way for Lycurgo to play the character in the Batverse. Although, I want to note this, I wouldn't put my money on it. Back to the comic book references now. Everyone knows that Catwoman's real name is Selina Kyle, but one thing that is not so clear is who her parents are. Now, in the movie, it's revealed that her father is none other than crime boss Carmine Falcone, which was a little bit of a shock, but it's not the first time that it's been alluded to that Falcone is her dad. In the comic book miniseries Catwoman, When in Rome, Selina Kyle comes to believe that her father might be Falcone, although she's never actually able to find conclusive proof. On to some of those Bat gadgets now. As Batman races back to his apartment after figuring out that he, aka Bruce Wayne, is the Riddler's next target, he calls Alfred to try and save him. As he calls, we see an old-fashioned phone with lights ringing in the manor. Now, while it's by no means a dead ringer, and yes, pun very much intended, this can be seen as a reference to the 1960 series bright red phone, along with some of the older designs in the comics. Also, the Batarang made an appearance, with it being revealed that the emblem on Batman's chest is one big Batarang. Now, while we know Catwoman's real name is Selina Kyle and Batman's real name is Bruce Wayne, the Riddler has gone by multiple names. Although his most famous alias is Edward Nygma, which of course can be shortened to Enigma. And of course, the movie chooses to do away with this name, giving him the more grounded name of Edward Nashton, which is a name he also had in the comics before he changed his last name to Nygma. Another ID card says Patrick Parker, which is also an alias that the villain has used in the comics. He's mentioned by name throughout, but we don't actually get to see the other one of Gotham's major mobsters, Sal Maroni. In the comics, Maroni is often seen as the biggest rival for Carmine Falcone, and in The Long Halloween, the two suspect each other of being behind the holiday murders. Maroni does have some pretty important history in the comic books, as it was him that splashed acid into Harvey Dent's face, turning him into the villain Two-Face. Maroni was played by Eric Roberts in The Dark Knight, but I would love to see him show up in a Batman sequel played by a classic gangster actor. My vote would be Joe Pesci. Come on. We've talked about some of the comic books that inspired the movie, but now let's talk about the movies that inspired it as well. In terms of the story, David Fincher's crime thrillers Zodiac and Seven are obvious influencers, but Reeves has said that he was also inspired by Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, and he would listen to the soundtrack while working on the script. Reeves also said that his main inspiration for Colin Farrell's Penguin wasn't any iteration from the comics, but actually the character Fredo in The Godfather. This movie provided us with a more raw, muscle car version of the Batmobile that hasn't been seen before in live action, and while it still turns heads, it's a lot more subtle and stealthy than other versions of Batman's classic ride, especially Bale's. This version of the Batmobile drew influence from the 1970s Batman comics by Neil Adams, where the Batmobile was a fairly normal-looking car that Batman drove for stealth purposes. Before he was Batman, or even a lighthouse wiki that hated Willem Dafoe's goddamn farts, Robert Pattinson was known for his roles as Cedric Diggory in the Harry Potter series and Edward Cullen in Twilight, which may or may not have been referenced in the Batman. In one line, Penguin says, quote, "Mr. Vengeance here, he doesn't bite," end quote, which may or may not have been a nod to Pattinson's vampire days. Maybe it's a coincidence, but I like to think that it was intentional. Another reference that is a little bit contentious is the one for Venom. And no, I'm not talking about the Marvel character. As Batman looks down and out, he injects himself with some green liquid, which acts like an adrenaline shot and helps him beat the living crap out of one of the Riddler's goons. The liquid in the vial looked very similar to Venom from the comics, which was the same substance that gave Bane his superhuman abilities. This could be paving the way for Bane to show up in the Batverse, and perhaps he'll be portrayed as some Venom addict that got super jacked. Who knows? Paul Dano absolutely crushed it as the Riddler, and his work in There Will Be Blood, 12 Years a Slave and Prisoner certainly led him onto the path to playing this iconic character. But there was one performance of Dano's that led Matt Reeves to writing the character specifically for Dano: his portrayal of Beach Boys frontman Brian Wilson in Love and Mercy. Speaking about it, Reeves said, quote, "That character, he's caught up in his artistry and he struggles to communicate with those around him. That was spiritually connected to the idea of this isolation that the Riddler felt. The Riddler is a product of our time, the way that people become isolated online and retreat to mental activities that substitute for not having contact." End quote. Of course, one of the most famous lines from the movie is, "I am vengeance," and the word quickly becomes associated with our Pat's version of the character, despite it being used by other iterations of Batman in the past. In fact, the working title for this movie was Batman Vengeance, until it eventually dropped away. However, the last two punches in the train station scene where the victim is already unconscious and Batman says, "I'm vengeance," yeah, that was Pattinson's idea, and improvised, saying, quote, "I wanted to say it as the guy is losing consciousness so it goes into his dreams. I wanted his future to be really, really damaged." End quote. Nirvana's classic song, Something in the Way, is used multiple times throughout the movie to great effect, as it tonally matches with this iteration of Batman. That's because Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne is inspired by Nirvana's frontman, Kurt Cobain. Writer-director Matt Reeves was listening to Nirvana when he wrote the first act, saying, quote, "That's when it came to me that, rather than make Bruce Wayne the playboy version we've seen before, there's another version who had gone through a great tragedy and became a recluse. Kurt Cobain had a relationship with fame, where being famous was not his goal. He loved music, but the idea of being famous for music was a double-edged sword for him. And that made me think of Robert Pattinson, actually. Because Rob is a very private person himself and doesn't necessarily like the part of being recognized everywhere as an actor." End quote. Back to Dano now. According to Matt Reeves, the scene in Gotham Hall where the Riddler communicates with Batman via livestream took 200 takes to pull off, most of which came at Dano's own request. In an interview, Reeves said, quote, "Paul goes, okay, let me try one where I'm off camera and I stick my head in. Let me try one where I'm already sitting. He's directing this one-person play on an iPhone." End quote. In fact, Dano's commitment to the character was so intense that he tried on hundreds of pairs of glasses to find the right ones. And he came to set on the first day with his head wrapped in plastic wrap, with the actor saying, quote, "The thoroughness of this person, the almost maniacal detail that he puts into plotting, I was like, okay, well maybe I should just shave all my body hair, so there's no evidence. I'm gonna wrap my head in saran wrap." End quote. At one point in the movie, Penguin refers to the Batman as Zorro. This is important, as in many versions of Batman's origins, the Wayne family was leaving a theater showing of Zorro when they were murdered. Also, Zorro was acknowledged by Bob Kane and Bill Finger as one of the main influences for Batman. And finally, if you stayed around until after the credits, you may have been disappointed that all you were given was a message from the Riddler that said goodbye. But that website, RATAALADA.com, that's actually a functioning website that you can visit right now and partake in some riddles and puzzles. Maybe it's got a new Wordle on there, huh?
Boy, that was a fantastic movie and a fantastic video. What were some of your favorite moments of the Batman? What were some things on the list that you already knew? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, everybody, thanks for watching.